Well, good day, my students. This is the lecture for September 20th, Tuesday in the evening. But as you all know, I'll be off in Ireland, so I cannot be there. So I'm doing two recordings. This first recording will be on the styles Fauvism, Cubism, non-objective art, Dada, and Surrealism. And the second recording will be abstract expressionism through photorealism. And it won't be a full 3 hours because nobody can listen or nobody can talk for that long and be efficient, I think. So let's get going, okay? So you might remember that you have two essays now due a week from today, the 27th, that is. And one is, of course, is the traditional stylistic essay. And that's what I want you to do. The other one, and you're just going to pick two styles of all the ones I reviewed today, just two styles and different styles and two different works, and tell me how those works are examples of that style. This is what you've been doing all semester long for this class. The other essay were 20 points and 1,000 words. Is this, and this of course is also available to you in the handout, the slides, and on the Moodle page. I want you to do what we call that research essay, which is to say, pick one work of art and see what three different writers have to say about it. And this is the same stuff I've been talking about in class for the last two times. It makes three on how to do it. In the first paragraph, tell me what you're going to do in this paper. Don't tell me you're going to examine one work, because you're not. You're going to examine what writers say. And these aren't artists, these are art historians or writers say about it. And the second paragraph, you just start off with so-and-so in a certain book. And third, and when you do the third and the fourth paragraph, you can also refer back to the first paragraph or your second paragraph to talk about what is similar or what's different about the way that person treats it with others, etc. So you do a comparison. And then the final paragraph, given those three sources, which one do you find most helpful in understanding the work and why? And that's it. Both essays are due by noon on September 27th. I'll be back in the country on the 22nd or 23rd of September, so I'll have time to grade your papers, and then you'll be done with the class. I've been asked, though, to remind you to do an evaluation of the class, if you will. I will see it eventually. I don't know when, but long after grades are in, etc. So I hope you've enjoyed it. So let's get going on the class. The first style we're going to look at in the 20th century is the style called Fauvism. It's a French word, fauve, and it's a pejorative, a negative term that was used to describe the artwork by an art critic. And compared to the works we've seen in the 19th century, the brilliant colors, just these totally emotional colors, which, by the way, come from the strength of people like Van Gogh that we saw last week. But this artist's name is Matisse. The picture is called Woman with the Green Stripe. It doesn't really have a title, but it's more referential with that green stripe. And you see the colors aren't analogous. They're not exactly opposite on the color wheel. They're just kind of wild. And in fact, that's what Fauvism means. Fauvism means wild animal. So the critic, when reviewing a show of these artists, said, well, these aren't artists, they're wild animals painting. And of course, the question of craftsmanship and quality came into question. Not very large works, but fairly quickly done, and still naturalistic to a certain degree, I suppose. This is probably Madame Matisse, Matisse's wife. But you see these brilliant colors going on here and the thick strokes. If you're used to naturalism, this is a shocker for you, isn't it? But that was Matisse in a nutshell. Here's another work by Matisse, Woman with a Hat from 1905, in which the background, remember the backgrounds of Leicester or Rembrandt? And now these backgrounds are alive with color. It's almost as if color is freeing itself from the need to describe an object, almost. But it still does describe an object. You see the eyes, and here a fancy lady all dressed up. There was a time when people would put like fruit in their hats, etc. The fancy folks in Paris. And here she's sitting in a chair, and she's got her hand on a beautiful a little wooden stick there, and turning and twisting. So we can tell what's going on here. So it's not abstract to the degree that you don't know, but it's still there. But the color does tend to take over, as in this work, The Red Studio by Matisse from 1911, in which you see the floor. Theoretically, it would be lighter towards us and darker further away. And then you see two, you could say three, but at least two side walls. But it's all the same red color. And that red jumps out at us. It's that freedom of the color. And the artwork sitting on the red are actually paintings or sculptures by Matisse himself. Well, this Fauvism, the freedom of the color, was used by artists. Where's my mouse? There we go. Like the next style, which we refer to as Cubism, and Picasso is the major artist we see here. Now, one of the problems with dealing with Picasso, it's not so much a problem as a fact, is that Picasso lived a very, very long life, and he kind of interpreted all of these art styles that cropped up in his own way. There's a very large painting. It's about 8 feet high in the Museum of Modern Art in New York, called the Maids or the Ladies of Avignon. Now, Avignon was a section just outside of Paris that a number of the artists lived in, and since it was outside of Paris, prostitution was legal. And so ladies would stand at windows, quite frankly, as they still do in Amsterdam, advertising their wares. And that's what we see here. So we're looking at 5 prostitutes, but in such a strange way. Certainly we see the freedom of color, and we see the brushstroke of Impressionism here. But we also see other things going on. So, for instance, the lady right in the middle who stares out at us. On the one hand, we can see her hands are up and her breasts are pointing in different areas, and she's looking straight out at us. But if you covered her left eye, it would be like a profile at the same time. Or the 2 ladies on the right-hand side who seem to have these strange mask-like things going on their faces. Let me show you a detail of that. Let me get over to it. It's not going over. Oh, there, I can do that. In which Picasso is showing you he's being influenced now by African masks. The artists are seeing what the French explorers and French mercenaries are bringing back from Africa, the colonies in Africa, and they go to the Ethnographic Museum. It's not art, it's ethnography, like an anthropology, but they see this as fine arts and they're incorporating it. I mean, look at that one breast under her chin. It's a diamond shape. And it's sort of a breast, but it isn't a breast, but it's breaking the mold of using the fine arts to define the object itself with the freedom of color. This was Cubism. Cubism, and you can read about it. I mean, you read about any of these styles in Khan Academy, as well as in the books that I have on reserve. So feel free to do that. But these works, you can almost talk more about the form per se than the content or the meaning of the work, where the meaning becomes kind of like the form itself. The use of color and well, you have movement here too, but it's not descriptive. Don't forget, by the 1900s, everybody's got a camera. So if you want to capture reality, so to speak, just aim your camera at it. Now it's fairly expensive, but you can get a copy of something or other, as we've all seen. Well, this is an early form of Cubism, still using color, but he really explored it in a work such as this one. Now you got to look carefully at this. This is the portrait of Daniel Kahnweiler. Kahnweiler was Picasso's gallery dealer. And someone suggested to Picasso, you can't do a cubist picture of a man so it looks like a man. And this was the result. These are not large pictures. The Maids of Avignon is, but this one's about 30 inches high, also at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And you look at it and immediately you want to say, well, there's nothing there. There's all these gray, and it's not actually gray, it's monochromatic, one chroma. So where's the color gone? So all of a sudden with Cubism, color disappears. It was around for a little while, it disappears, it comes back again, but now color is gone, and instead we've got kind of a monochromatic simplification of shapes to geometric shapes. So you look at this and say, well, there's nothing going on here. There's nothing I can see. And you look closely. Well, I mean, except for the fact that I do see on the right-hand side, kind of in the middle on the right, I see brush strokes, and that reminds me of Impressionism. And I can't see a thing at all except, well, it does look like a face now that I'm looking at it. And you see kind of two eyes and maybe a mustache and a nose. And look down further at the base in the middle, you see hands being clasped. But they're just geometric shapes, but they're still hands. So now you're not sure. It's like you're seeing in and through and around the object. And that's what Cubism was. By the way, don't forget, at this point in time, Niels Bohr and scientists were talking about the idea that you can take an object and tear it apart and go through it. This object, any object made of atoms and the nucleus. By the way, this is the same time that people are talking about energy. Einstein's talking about energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, which I don't exactly know what that means, but I'll accept it because other people do. But this is the equivalent of that. You're going in and out and around and through. This is not a painting to describe a particular person. It's a painting more about art itself. Here's another picture. This is called Ma Jolie. Picasso is using, you see in the very bottom, you see Ma Jolie, my joy, in French. And this was a depiction of his girlfriend. Once again, it's totally non-representational. Well, except just above the Ma Jolie, it kind of looks like an elbow and a hand, and you look closer, it's like she has a hat on, and you can kind of see where eyes are. And on the right-hand side, well, I don't know, it looks, maybe it's a flute or a guitar instrument. So we see music. Since when can you see music? Here, I've got a detail of that. There, I mean, since when can you see music? Well, you can't, you hear it. So this is Cubism in a nutshell. Now, Cubism, this way we refer to as analytical Cubism. And by the 1920s, then Picasso moved on to what he later referred to as synthetic Cubism. And this also at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. It's about 8 feet high, very large picture of 3 musicians. And obviously, they were the artists, and Picasso's not the only one, though I'm showing here just the only one. They're playing musical instruments, a flute or a pipe of some sort on the left, in the center a guitar, and this fellow on the right holding music. So we're seeing music and we're seeing everything being played. The funny uniforms they're wearing would be a harlequin, which would be French and Spanish musicians in the street. they would be busking, asking for money. And it looks like a little cute little child's hands playing that wind instrument there, as well as the guitar. So the artists are really interested in different sources other than traditional Renaissance art. Look, it's not the Renaissance anymore. It's the 1920s. We've been through the First World War. And that was disastrous. All these artists have been through. A number of the artists did not fight, but they were medics. And certainly they were affected by this war to end all wars, which of course it didn't exactly work that way. But why should they do representation? The world has changed, and so their work changes too. One of the most powerful of the Cubist works was this one called Guernica from 1937. This is in the Reina Sofia Museum in Madrid, and it is about 25 feet long. It is huge, and it is monochromatic like this. I'm not going to go into huge detail here. I've done this in other places, etc. In fact, I brought a group to Spain about a year ago, and we stood for a good hour looking and examining this. Guernica is a city in northern Spain, and Francisco Franco, who was good friends with a fellow by the name of Hitler, had a kind of a little civil war on his hands in Spain and in the Basque region, that's up north. Franco decided maybe Hitler could help him out, and he gave Hitler the coordinates of this small town that was making munitions, and a small town that was protesting Franco, and Franco as a dictator trying to organize the country. And so they strafed and bombed this town to smithereens. It's actually the first time in warfare that planes were used to do such a thing. And I mean, they didn't just bomb manufacturing facilities. They bombed everything: churches, schools, homes. They just leveled the town. When word got out, then Picasso was asked, "What are you going to do?" And this was his answer. It's monochromatic, like the earlier analytical Cubist works, principally because he was using, among other things, some photos he had seen in the newspaper to do this. And if I don't have close-ups of it, but you can see them online on how it almost looks like newsprint in it. So on the left, you have a mother holding a dead child, just screaming. This Cubism works really well when you want to show emotion. I mean, look at her eyes are all distended and moving about. And the horse and the bull become very important in Spanish culture. In a Spanish bullfight, by the way, horses are frequently sacrificed, and the bull is the strong thing. And here the bull kind of looks out at an angle and directly at us at the same time. Above the horse is this light and inside, and a face comes in immediately to the right, comes zooming in to look at what had just happened with a light. On the very bottom, you see there a warrior whose sword has been broken and he's been cut up into little pieces. And further on the right, you have another person kind of all distended and broken up. And on the very right, a woman, one assumes so, with that large curve thing by the left hand, in a house that's on fire. This is war. This is a description of war. So this is kind of an example of both art that serves fine arts as politics as well. Well, we've seen in the 20th century then a rejection of naturalism, a rejection of the need to describe works that we see with our eyes. But we've always seen objects, haven't we? Well, we go to the next style, a style that was really propagated mostly in Germany by, among other things, a Russian by the name of Kandinsky, Vasily Kandinsky. And the style they referred to, by the way, all these styles have manifestos to them. The style that he refers to he referred to as non-objective art. In other words, not that you would object to it, but it doesn't have an object in it. I think the question came out in the art world is, how far can you go, still paint, but not have an object that you recognize? And Kandinsky was one who developed kind of a clean style. This also came out of a group known as the Bauhaus movement, but a very clean style here, where he did watercolors and paintings, etc., in which you kind of want to read this as, I don't know, maybe that big triangle in the middle is a man, but maybe it isn't. Maybe it's just lines and circles and designs. See, we can't read this as a person, really, and we can't read it as music. Some have suggested, well, that blue thing kind of on the left is like a lake and there's a boat on it. Well, it could be, or they're just curves and lines. Can you make art without objects? And how do you do it? What's the process? Well, the critics, of course, just hated this stuff. All of this goes along with that whole notion we read about last week, known as the avant-garde, wanting to be ahead of the curve, wanting to be to kind of demonstrate to the world where art is going, not satisfying everybody, but or nobody in this case. Another artist by that, very similar in non-objective art, was Piet Mondrian. And these works, by the way, I have to say, these works done before there was such thing as masking tape, so you could tape out areas and paint them, of these very large, usually primary color shapes in a canvas. This is not objective. I mean, except for the fact that you could say, well, it looks like a box. You know, there's a red box and a blue and a yellow on the bottom right. So what's he after? Well, it's composition here. It's form. So that the red kind of comes forward to us and is weighing heavy on this design underneath. So it's all about design. When you look close at a Mondrian painting, then you say, well, I don't know what's going on. I know. Maybe I'll look at the title. The title will give me an idea. The title's called Composition Number 2. Right. The title does not. If you look further, it says in Dutch, red, blue, and yellow, which is what it is. In other words, the art is getting further and further away, if you will, from being descriptive and being more design-oriented. Now, it's okay. You'll look at this and you're not in class, because if you were in class, we'd be talking about it and you'd say, oh, well, this is just crap. And, I don't believe it's really art. And, any child can do this. This is the kind of standard argument, etc. And, but you're wrong. Any child cannot do that. And by the way, the child did not do that in 1930 and didn't do it where Mondrian did it to influence other artists and all that other stuff that we talk about. But that's okay. You don't have to like it or dislike it. But you look at it and you say, well, I mean, many people want to dismiss it. But if I showed you earlier Mondrian works, then suddenly this will make sense. So here are two pictures by Mondrian. I'm only going to show you these two earlier pictures. The top one of an old gnarled tree. So you see the brushstrokes of Impressionism and Post-Impressionism. And you see a kind of representation of a tree and all these curves, but sort of to the top and the right, these curves take on a life of their own. And look at the painting underneath it. These are individual paintings. It tends to be monochromatic, but it's not black and white. It's monochromatic. There's some little browns and dark reds in there. But it's still, if I asked you what it is, you'd say, well, I don't know, it's just shapes. But it's more than shapes. It's, these curves, well, it doesn't look like anything. But if it looked like something, would be like a tree. So we get a hint with Mondrian that the way he did his work was he looked at nature and simplified it to verticals and horizontals. So it was a reductionist to reducing or reductionist tendency for non-objective art. Well, World War I and eventually World War II, of course, really affected the art world as it affected the artists. And think about it for a minute. World War I. Now you've got huge armies, and they're all dressed differently. You know, this guy's got red on, and this guy's got a dark green on, and you're told, you 5,000 people stand in that field and fire your shots at those 5,000 people in that field. This is not hand-to-hand combat anymore. This is using modern technology, or you're dropping bombs. Modern technology. Really. So you're using in war, and the war affects all of Europe here, Western Europe. You're using in war kind of a logic, right? Because our leaders say, get your guns and go over to the front and kill those guys. But you don't know them. There were a group of artists who, after going through World War I and surviving, got together. By the way, all the art movements are literary movements first. There were writers. And they used kind of a sense of lack of logic or non-logic in their artwork. Yeah, look where logic got us. We killed people. We don't know those people, but we killed them anyhow. So the artist said, well, let's use lack of logic, if that's possible, to create artwork. So these were a group who got together in Switzerland, stuck a penknife in a dictionary, it is said, and came out with the word Dada, D-A-D-A, which would be a child's name for daddy in Swiss French, Dada. So they say, right, that's our style. And their major proponent, and there are a number of them, but I'm only going to show you one, was a Frenchman by the name of Marcel Duchamp. And here's an example of one of his works. Yep, that's what it is. He called it the fountain. But of course, it's a urinal. So what he did was he went to the Mott plumbing works in Lower Manhattan, because he went back and forth from Paris to New York. But in Lower Manhattan, a plumbing store called the Mott, M-O-T-T, and bought a urinal and signed it R-Mutt, M-U-T-T, and dated it 1917. Now, I dated 1918 because the original one was destroyed, thrown away probably, and so he just made another one. Made, by the way, is kind of in quotes. He called it the fountain. Yeah, okay, it involves it. Look at this. I mean, the only ones who ever look at this usually are guys, and they don't examine it. But notice how you could talk about this work, about this urinal, like the way you talk about, Michelangelo's David, with curves and lines and designs and geometricity. But what did Duchamp do? He picked it out. Did he make it? No. He called it, in fact, his ready-mades. He just picked it out and put it in an art show. So now, instead of it being functional, well, what makes it art? Notice you want to say, well, why is this art? Duchamp would say, or most people would say, Duchamp would say, it's art because the artist said it is. He didn't even make it. You might feel better if you knew the craftsman who made this porcelain thing. Maybe he had an art background or design background, but probably not. Probably was just an engineer, and it was poured in a mold, like they all are. But he signed it, R. Mutt. So it's got another level, if you will, of kind of intellectualization. There's a lack of logic. So is it art or not? See, here's the problem. And by the way, this dates from 1918. We are still in the shadow of Duchamp. Because the problem is this art or not? If you say it is, then when you get up after this lecture, and if you're in at school or something, and you go to a urinal, if you're a guy, then, just a couple of guys in the class. But is that art? What about the chair you're sitting in right now? It's got curves and lines, etc. Is that art? Well, you never thought of it as art. You thought of it as practical. If you put it in a gallery, would it be art? Is that the only difference? Why is the chair you're sitting in art if I put it in a gallery? Or tip it upside down? Or maybe it isn't art. And maybe for art for you is craftsmanship. Notice how we started getting away from naturalistic images in the 20th century, and now we're into a really strange area here. If the chair I'm sitting in is not art, why isn't it? Oh, and by the way, if the chair I'm sitting in is art, what about the chair you're sitting in? Is that art too? And if everything's art, then how do we know what's good or bad? Do you see the problems the Dadaists brought up? But this was their version of if you will, lack of logic. Here, let me show you another work by Duchamp. We could talk about this, but we're obviously not talking, but it's it. A photograph he did. And it's called Rose Salavi. Rose Salavi. See, it says lovingly Rose Salavi, and then underneath Marcel Duchamp. So Marcel Duchamp dressed himself up as a woman. This was gender identification and definition was not a thing in the 20s, and called himself Rose Salavi. Well, Rose was a very popular name in the 10s and the 20s, but not spelled that way. In fact, if you know French, arroser means to water. And Salavi, if you say it that way, Salavi means nothing. But if you say it, c'est la vie, well, c'est la vie, what does that mean in French? C'est la vie means that's life. Literally means that's life. So he called it, since arroser means to water, the idiom is, I don't mean to offend anybody, piss on it, that's life. Water it, that's life. So he calls it, piss on it, that's life. And as a man dresses as a woman and calls it art. Do we have a problem or not? Here he is at a retrospective show of his works. He loved chess. Before he died, he stopped making art. He said, yeah, I'm done making art. I've done it. So here he hired a nude model, and they played chess during the opening of the exhibit. Welcome to the world of illogic, Dada, and the lack of logic. We've seen already one, I think I showed it to you once very quickly, this work by Duchamp, another of his ready-mades, LHOOQ, LHOOQ. What is it? It's a postcard. Did he make the postcard? No, he picked it out. Where did he pick it out? The Louvre. The bookstore in the Louvre. You can go down next time you're in Paris. Go down, and it's of the Mona Lisa. And then with a pencil, drew a mustache and a goatee on this lady. I don't know if you can see it in this picture, but titled it LHOOQ. Well, it's an acronym in French. So if you say the French letters LHOOQ, it literally means, but I can't say it exactly because I don't want to say it on a video recording, the lady has a hot bottom. I'll put it that way. What? The Mona Lisa? First, he changes the most famous woman painting, I suppose, into a male, and then says she's pretty hot. Very. This is where illogic gets you. Also, a sense of humor, or kind of a making fun of the art world at the same time. Here's another work Duchamp did called Fresh Widow. You'll see on the very bottom it says copyright Rose Salavi. Yeah. Okay, Fresh Widow. Well, what is it? It's a French window. A French window with all those little curves. But instead of glass, I mean, a window is for glass, right? He uses black leather, like something a widow might have. So he denies the function or the use of it. Oh, maybe that's why it's art. Notice on all of these things, if you accept it as art, then it becomes problematic. What about other things like that? Or what about this? The inverted bicycle wheel. There's a stool. He didn't design the stool. He picked it out. There's a bicycle wheel. He didn't design the bicycle wheel. He went to a shop. And he had somebody drill a hole in it. He put it through, and now it's a sculpture. Is it art because it's not functional anymore? Notice with Dada, you're called into question about, is this art or not? And the whole question of seriousness of art, but you can talk about it as design, can't you? You can still refer to it, the circles and the curves and the shadows that it causes, different colors. Duchamp was notorious. His teeth were really bad. He came to New York, and he had Daniel Zank, a dentist in Manhattan, fix his teeth in 1919. And to pay him, Duchamp created a fake check. Look at the name of the bank, the Teeth's Loan and Trust Company. I mean, that's not a real bank. So he created like a fake check to pay him $115. Wow, that must have been like thousands of dollars in today's money. Well, London can look it up. She does that. I think you're a good money lady. Anyhow, and to Duchamp's surprise, Daniel Zank accepted the check. By the way, his heirs eventually sold this to a museum for $250,000. So there you go. Is it art? What's this called? It's called Paris Air. What are you looking at? Air. Oh, wait. I'm looking at kind of like a melted test tube of some sort that Duchamp bought in Paris and had somebody close up the end, by heating it. So you can see the air, because the air must have been in Paris, and he brought it over to New York and he sold it to a museum. Paris Air. All of a sudden, art is not about those old things that we're used to seeing. It's about modern life. Now, this total lack of logic seemed to upset a number of people in the art world, as you might imagine, but a lot of people really liked the idea to free yourself up. And one of those was a young artist. He did not go through the First World War, but he went through the time of the Second World War, an artist by the name of Salvador Dali. And perhaps this is one of his most famous works. It's a small painting. It's a Museum of Modern Art. It's about 8.5 by 11. It's about the size of a piece of paper. Called The Persistence of Memory. Oh, look at this. We've got objects again. Yeah, but this lack of logic continues. Dali and the others called their style Surrealism. In other words, it's more than realism, it's super realism or surrealism they used. Surrealism is the French word. So what are we looking at? Well, we're looking at where Dali is from, the Port Legat, right by Cadaqués in northeast Spain. And that's the Mediterranean there, and mountains. Oh, there's a mountain on the left. But notice this mountain doesn't actually act like a mountain, because mountains aren't perfectly right angled and square like this block. Oh, and there's a tree, but the tree's totally dead. And hanging off the tree, as well as hanging off the mountain, are these watches. Pocket watches. At the time, pocket watches were real popular. Every gentleman would have a pocket watch. But pocket watches are not organic. So a fly would not land on a pocket watch. That orange thing is also the pocket watch clothes. There are ants all over it. But Dali then, in this dream-like sense, remember the lack of logic? But this is the logic of a dream. We all have these weird dreams. And they're totally illogical, but they seem real at the time. So you've got like literally time melting here. And then this funny thing in the middle, which Dali identifies, I don't want to offend you, but he called it his masturbation image, whatever that means. Some have said it looks like an eye. Some have said it looks like a woman's pubic area. But like in a dream, it seems surreal, even though you don't know what it is. We have returned now to a foreground, middle ground, background, haven't we? We've returned now to objects. But the objects don't act like the objects we identify them to be. And the title indicates that dreamlike escape. So surrealism was a continuation of Dada in some ways, but it dealt with other things. And surrealism's patron saint, the driving force of surrealism, was ostensibly someone who was not interested in art really, but was a fellow from Austria, psychoanalyst by the name of Sigmund Freud. See, Freud was interested in dreams. And Freud was convinced that, young lady, you're dreaming about having sex with your father, and a young man, you're having sex with your mother, and you're all about sex, and yada, yada, and all. And the surrealists loved this. Now, Freud, of course, was trying to bring people out of their paranoias or their problems and their dreams by talking about them and trying to solve the problems. Surrealists didn't want to solve a problem. They just wanted to emphasize it. So here's another there. So there's the disappearing bust of Voltaire on a stand. Wait a minute. While it is clearly the depiction of Voltaire, is also three people here, two Dutch burghers. They're dressed like the 17th century Dutch and Dutch people, and they're in the background, but this is in the foreground. I mean, how can that be at the same time? And here you have a topless lady. This, by the way, is Dali's wife. Well, currently, she's the wife of another surrealist, but eventually she'll leave him and marry Dali, Madame Gala. And she's looking at them, and we're looking at this ruin. And on the right-hand side, we've got, it looks like fruit in a dish, except that there's a pear and an apple, but the apple is this guy's butt right there, and they're dancing in the middle ground or foreground. It's these dreamscapes. Here's some detail. If you want to see some of Dali's works in the United States, there's a special Dali museum in St. Petersburg, Florida, I might recommend. It's about 8.5 feet tall, referred to as the hallucinogenic Toreador. Dali died about 10 years after this painting. And it shows the Venus de Milo, a very famous sculpture here. Oh, but it's also a mouth and a nose and a chin and the green tie in the middle part. And these big gadflies in a stadium here. And you see shadows, and it's all the psychosexual things. Oh, there's Voltaire again on the bottom right. And shadows, and that's his wife, Madame Gala, swimming in a pool there. It's the lack of logic, but emphasizing here psychosexual things. Perhaps one of the strongest artists was a Belgian whose name was Paul Delvaux. Paul Delvaux. And here he is in this picture called Pygmalion. You might remember the story. It's a classical story. It's a Greek story. There's a sculptor, Pygmalion, and he rejects all earthly women, and he carves a statue of a woman and prays to the gods that the woman comes alive because he's fallen in love with this work he's done. And of course that happens, etc. Well, that's the story, and this is the surrealist version of it, where the role has been reversed. It's the real woman and a sculpture of this male, and the psychosexual thing going on here in a ruined landscape. On the right-hand side, there's a woman who is kind of part flower, flowers in her hair and on her body, as she walks by a man in a bowler hat. Of course, she smells like the perfume she's wearing and totally naked, and the guy doesn't recognize her. It's that dreamscape that we've seen before. Another work by Delvaux. I will end with Surrealism here, and we'll continue on with Abstract Expressionism when you're ready. This has been a 46-minute lecture. Thank you.